Hello, Alex here, and in 2022 at the start of the year I set myself a couple of goals, and in this video I want to talk about how I got on with those, talk about a couple of recent and particularly interesting gear purchases, and then talk about a couple of goals that I'm going to set for myself for 2023. So Happy New Year, let's get into it. Whether it's in your work or your personal life, I do think it's important to have goals and targets that you try and push yourself to reach, and that's certainly how I approach most things in life personally. I come up with some sort of a target that I want to reach and then identify specific, relatively easily achievable goals that I would need to, or checkpoints that I would need to reach on my way towards that. In work, that's easier. In photography, the end goal is just to get better at photography and enhance my skill set. So there's no real definition to the end goal. I will never have actually achieved it. So each year I try and set myself just a couple of targets to bring myself maybe a little bit closer. Pick up a new skill, try something different, and see how we get on with that. The first of those goals I set myself was to travel more after 2 years of the COVID pandemic, and that I did, just a little bit. I spent a week in Kent visiting old family and old friends. I'm from Kent originally, and it was just nice to visit these people, see them. I haven't been in a few years because of the pandemic. I do normally go over every maybe 2 years. But yeah, it was nice. I spent a week away and it was just a really nice way to celebrate my 30th birthday. So very grateful for that trip. And I shot a lot of film, I think 8 rolls, including a few stocks that I'd never shot before, which I will eventually be making videos on. Aside from that, I did take a short trip away to Berlin to visit my friend Loris Mendio. That was an absolute blast. It was my first time traveling to a country where the native language isn't English on my own. My solo trips before have always been to native English speaking countries, and now Berlin is okay for someone who doesn't speak great German. Mein Deutsch ist nicht sehr gut, but I'm still able to get by with what little I have, and the fact that everyone seems to speak pretty much perfect English over there. Similarly to the Kent trip, I did pick up some film that I hadn't shot previously, and I might make a couple of videos, my first roll kind of videos on some of those stocks. But I don't really have any plans to do videos on the trips themselves per se, because I don't feel like I'm interesting enough for that kind of content. I don't think people would care. But if some people would like that, I guess let me know and I'll see if I can script something that, is somewhat entertaining with all the B-roll that I have. Not sure, you tell me, basically. My second 2022 goal was to develop my own C41 color negative film at home, which I did. I purchased and blew through a 1 litre Rolly Colorchem C41 kit in a couple of weeks. My Jobo is on the floor right behind my chair. That's what I use to dictate my position in the room for my framing. And it was not as bad as they say. It really is actually fine so long as you have some reasonable temperature control. It's really not that bad. There were a couple of these batches where I was a little bit sloppy, still came out perfectly fine. And even with just a 1 litre kit, which is not very economical compared to a 2.5 or a 5 litre kit from whatever brand, it's still a lot cheaper than going to the lab, especially with all the recent price hikes for lab dev. The third and final goal that I set for myself for 2022 was to try switching from Movavi Video Editor to DaVinci Resolve. This is one that I didn't actually go through with all the way. I tried it and I tried the free version, and it turns out the free version doesn't use GPU hardware acceleration. I have a 2070 in my computer and my i7, it is an i7, 10, whatever. The integrated graphics on that are not able to handle 4K video editing, whereas the graphics card is, the discrete graphics card. So unfortunately that didn't really work out too well, but something I did try for funsies was installing it on my work laptop, which is the original base model 7-core 2020 M1 MacBook Air. That's an integrated graphics chip, and it worked really well even on the free version. I've been thinking about switching from this machine to a MacBook of some sort when the time comes to replace it. So I think I'm just going to delay this 2022 goal and say whenever I replace this machine, I will go to DaVinci Resolve then. I'm basically not willing to spend that much money on the software, knowing that I'm going to replace this machine probably within 18 months, and then probably have to rebuy it on OS X anyway. So it's an amazing piece of software. It's much better to use than Movavi and much more stable. But just the fact that I would have to export every video on the integrated graphics that's a no-no for me. So I tried. I will do it at some stage. When it comes to gear, I don't really like hoarding things and keeping them just for the sake of maybe one day. I'm generally happier to let things go cheap and sell them to someone who will actually use them if I'm not getting the value out of it. And I have sold a few things this year, but I've also picked up a couple of things. The two main things in the last couple of months have been, thanks to a special someone, a Canon UF1, because I recently realized I didn't actually own a mechanical or manual 35mm SLR camera, and a Fujinon SW 105mm f8 lens for my 4x5 camera. The FD system actually appeals to me quite a lot because of the availability of lenses and the general lower barrier to entry in terms of pricing. And thanks to a friend who was in Japan for quite a while, I think you can probably guess who, he was able to pick this up for me while he was over in Japan for less than the cost of an AE1 or an A1 over here. I'm getting a lot of camera for comparatively little money. I mean, I know the AE1 is particularly overpriced, but the A1 really isn't for what it is. This worked out cheaper than that. That's a huge win. To go with the body, I picked up the new FD or NFD 28mm f2.8 and the NFD 50mm f1.4 lenses. I also picked up one of these Canon speed lights for this model. I think it's the 155A, which is the thyristor flash because the camera doesn't have TTL flash of any sort. One of the reasons I wanted this camera is because I've tried and quite enjoyed using an A1, but I don't like the build quality, and this is built much more like a tank. This is more like your Nikon F3 kind of equivalent in the FD lineup. Additionally, it's mostly mechanical, especially compared to something like an F3. Everything from the flash sync speed up to 1/2000th of a second is purely mechanical, as well as bulk mode. And that's a huge thing for me because even though Ireland doesn't get down to -20, the cold night weather can cause and has caused cameras to just stop working if the battery gets too cold. So having purely mechanical bulk mode is a big win for me. As for the 105, the two lens kit that I've been working with so far is the Schneider 135mm f5.6 Simar and the Rodenstock 180mm f5.6 Cirinar N. 180 is a bit shorter than the 210 that a lot of people work with, but these lenses are focal lengths that work with the rangefinder in the 45 RF, so I was willing to make that kind of compromise. But the 135 is just a little bit too tight for me. So you might ask, why 105 and why not 90? If you watch this video from last year, I got a 90mm Angulon, regular Angulon, f6.8 with the monorail camera, which I gave to Tom for his birthday. Tom, bring the monorail. And I just don't like the 90mm focal length. The shutter doesn't work well, it's sticky and only works on bulk mode, so it's actually on top of the TLR. I'm looking at the screen there. I turned it into a pinhole. I still have the optics lying around wrapped up securely in case I ever do decide to get the shutter fixed, but I've composed with it and I know that 90mm is just a little bit too wide for me. So I basically just split the difference between 90 and 135. That would give me 105 to 110. The dream would be the Schneider XL 110mm f5.6. That's a little bit too expensive and a bit too rich for my tastes, so I opted for one of the 105mm lenses on the market. You pretty much have two choices. Ultra wide lenses or pretty damn wide lenses 5x7, which have a huger image circle, much bigger image circle, but are generally a bit slower, or the faster f5.6 lenses that barely cover 4x5. In the end, I chose the Fujinon SW 105mm f8 because of that greater image circle, and that there are a lot more reviews for this lens than people probably realize, because optically, this is the same lens used in the G and GX 617 lineup. Just it's on a lens board instead of in a helicoid. So I know it performs very well, and I'm very strongly considering getting into 617 at some stage in the next like 5-ish years. It's not a high priority, but I'm thinking ahead and trying to buy lenses that would cover that. And the 105 and then the 180 together both cover 5x7, so it would cover 6x17 quite nicely. So my copy is optically in absolutely fantastic condition. The shutter speeds are all crispy accurate. The aperture is nice. It's a bit loose, but nothing too crazy. The only bad thing to say about it really is that it's on the wrong lens board. I bought it even though it's on the wrong lens board because the price was right. It was so cheap that I'm going to be able to buy a proper Toyo View lens board for the Vista, swap it over, and it'll still be, you know, a good price for what it is. But it just means that I can't use it yet. So I'm mostly just using it as a fidget toy on my desk. But it's huge. There is no denying that this thing is absolutely gargantuan compared to a similarly spec'd, like an f8 90mm would be tiny. An f4.5 or 5.6 would be understandably large. It's just that this thing covering such a large image circle, even though it's an f8 lens, makes it quite big. But I think I'm gonna be okay with that because I'm using 4x5 for things that I more generally like plan and pre-visualize, so it doesn't matter too much to me. It's kind of annoying that it is so big, but it's not a deal breaker, especially if it means I can distill everything down to a simple 2-lens kit, 105, 180. Similarly, I'm going to set myself 3 goals for the year of 2023. And the first is the natural evolution of one of the goals from 2022, that being to develop E6 film at home. Now, the Bigger Picture down in Cork have recently started offering more and more film formats and development types, but it's a long way to ship a roll of slide film from where I am, especially if I only have one to do. If I were doing a lot more slide, which I might in the future, then it would become more economical in terms of postage there and back. But still, it would be nice to be able to do it at home, especially for some of the stranger things I have, like the Provia 400X that I would like to push, or my Ektachrome P800 1600, which I will need to push to get the most out of. It's not in great condition, check Patrick's video on that, but I still want to be able to do it, which will require home dev. So that's going to be one of the more achievable goals for the year, and I will just shoot a few rolls of slide over the coming months for things like, as I said, thyristor flash testing, a bit of large format slide, and just see how I get on with it, and then eventually pick up a kit and start developing. The second will be to get back into macro photography. Most people don't know that macro is my favorite subject or genre of photography. I love extreme close-ups. That's one advantage of the Fujinon 105 versus my 135. For a fixed bellows extension, I get a higher magnification. On my camera, I get about 2x life-size magnification versus about 1.2 or 1.25x with the 135. That's quite a big difference, and I would really like to get into that more in 4x5, which I have been, admittedly. I've been working at max bellows extension on that camera quite a bit. But even on smaller formats, I want to start doing it more. I used to do it all the time when I was younger. Here are some of my older original macro photos from when I was like 15. And I think I did pretty well with these, even though I've lost the original files and these are low-res copies downloaded from like Facebook uploads maybe 8-9 years ago at this stage. I had a bit of an eye for it, and it's something I really enjoy doing, and I'm going to push myself to do more of it in the coming year. My third and final goal will be to say bye-bye to Canon. A lot of people will already know that I fundamentally disagree with how Canon are handling the RF mount, which is why I was briefly covering RF news, especially coming up to the R3, and then just stopped. Not because the videos didn't do particularly well or that I didn't have anything to add, both of which are true. But it's just, yeah, I completely disagree with how they're handling third-party lenses, and I am at a stage where I'm not really doing sports and action stuff anymore. Basically at all. I think I've done 5 paid sports gigs in the last like year and a half, 2 years. It's not enough to justify keeping the 1DX Mark III or a similar high-speed, lower resolution action camera versus the slower paced family portraits, weddings-ish kind of stuff that I'm doing, where resolution is usually more important than speed. You know, both are important, but there's a definite bias towards higher resolution in the work that I'm currently doing. So I'm going to be switching. I will still finish off the reviews that I've started on all the various EF gear that I have, but I will be selling it off and migrating to a different system entirely. Some of you know what that is. If you don't, I would like to hear your guesses and I guess justifications as to why you think I would be going for that particular system in the comments down below, if you care to talk about that. But yeah, EF, good. RF, not so good. And well, maybe not that it's not good. I mean, I'm privileged enough to be in a position where when upgrading from a lower resolution camera to a higher resolution camera, I can simply not go with the R5 and adapt the lenses that I already have, sell them, take the hit, and move to something else, to a different company whose kind of attitude, I guess, is more in line with my own beliefs. So we'll talk about this more, I guess, when the change actually happens. But for now, I guess I'll just say one of my goals is to say bye-bye to Canon and have something say hello to me for a change. These are my goals for 2023, and if you have any interesting goals that you've set yourself for the coming year, I'd be interested in hearing them in the comments down below, because I think it's good to talk about these things. Goals are one of the ways that we can incrementally progress our skill set as photographers. Aside from all the idea of setting goals in work and achievable targets and whatever, it's interesting for us to be able to set reasonable, achievable targets and talk about how we get on with them. So if you want to talk about that in the comments down below, let me know, and otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. So stay safe, and bye-bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you like this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.